navy blue uniform was still damp with sweat when Amanda Carter left the Bayou Diner at 9:42 p.m. on October 20th, 1983. Stepping into the humid night on Dixie Drive, the 22-year-old single mother was headed to the pharmacy, a short trip of just a few minutes, but it was the last journey she would ever take. The next morning, her body was found beneath a cluster of ferns by Blackwater Creek, leaving behind a motherless child and a community gripped by an unnamed dread. 42 years later, on a damp morning in Tallahassee, an elderly man was handcuffed at his home, amidst the stunned gazes of neighbors who had once seen him as a model of kindness. What happened between those two moments, from an old pickup truck to a forgotten blood sample, unveiled a horrific secret no one had dared to imagine. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated with the latest stories. The number 8 cuffs snapped shut around Walter Granger's wrists at exactly 6 a.m. on a frigid Tuesday morning in January 2025. The metallic clank rang out in the quiet of Live Oak Drive, a tranquil suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Tallahassee, where Granger had lived for nearly 4 decades without anyone ever suspecting a thing. In a worn silver-striped bathrobe, he shuffled down his porch steps, hands locked behind his back, feet in furry slippers, his unsteady gait not entirely due to age, but to a shock that hadn't yet settled. On the sidewalk in front of his lawn, patrol cars flashed their lights. On the freshly mowed grass, footsteps left faint traces in the dew of an unusual morning. Neighbors, who were used to seeing Granger tinkering with his car or watering plants each afternoon, now peered from behind curtains, their eyes unable to believe what was unfolding. He was the man who helped the Clemens fix their water pump, repaired Miss Ramirez's ceiling fan, and brought a turkey to the Chandlers every Thanksgiving. A friendly old mechanic who attended First Baptist Church regularly and chatted about football with the neighborhood kids. And now, he was being led away from his home like a dangerous criminal. Diane Granger, his 73-year-old wife, stood frozen on the porch. She only managed to utter "Walter" before dropping her steaming coffee mug, letting it shatter into white porcelain shards on the gray concrete. She sank to her knees on the steps, as if her legs could no longer bear the weight of reality. Eyes unblinking, she whispered, first to herself, then louder, choking with emotion. "They've got the wrong man. They've got the wrong man. Walter couldn't have done that." But standing in the yard, her gaze sharp beneath her cap, Detective Marissa Hail said nothing. She only clutched a worn yellow case file tightly. Inside it, the conclusion of 8 months of silent genetic investigation. Intricate genealogical charts mapped out an undeniable story. No one in the neighborhood knew that for over half a year, Hail had quietly traced DNA segments, compared genetic markers, reconstructed family trees spanning 5 generations, and slowly, piece by piece, the puzzle had fallen into place. For her, this was no longer just a case, it was a quest for justice for a woman forgotten since 1983. When Walter Granger stepped into the police car, head bowed, the early sunlight broke through the old oak trees. On the dew-covered Live Oak Drive, tranquility had shattered. But for Marissa Hail, this was only the beginning of the truth, because within the file she gripped under her left arm, among dozens of rusted paperclip-bound documents and intricate genealogical charts, one name was always underlined in red: Amanda Lynn Carter. The young woman who died over 4 decades ago, a woman Hail had never met, but knew intimately through medical records, class schedules, prescriptions, and the final words left in her diary. A case that all of Leon County had given up hope of solving, Marissa Hail was now unraveling from the start, from where it truly began. A wet October night in 1983, on the other side of Dixie Drive. On October 20th, 1983, at 9:42 p.m., Amanda Lynn Carter, 22 years old, single mother, nursing student at Florida A&M, walked out the back door of the Bayou Diner, where she worked the evening shift from Monday to Saturday. The small diner, tucked under ancient oak trees, was a familiar haunt for the townsfolk of Quincy. Amanda wore her dark blue uniform, a windbreaker thrown on against the chilly air after an early rain. She said goodbye to the manager, pulled her car keys from her apron pocket, and headed straight for her 1980 Honda Civic, parked by the fence. That night, like every night, she planned to stop by Gilbert's Pharmacy on Main Street to pick up fever medication for her son, Noah, just 4 years old, battling a high fever at home with his grandmother. The trip should have taken less than 5 minutes, but Amanda never made it to the pharmacy. The next morning, Louisa Carter, Amanda's mother, arrived early to take over watching her grandson. She knocked, but no one answered, and the Civic was nowhere in the driveway. When she called the diner, she learned Amanda had clocked out as usual. Panic set in. She knew Amanda would never leave her son without a word. By noon, the police were notified. And then, on the morning of October 22nd, during a volunteer search along Blackwater Creek, a local retired deer hunter named Eli Monroe found her body face down under a patch of dwarf palmettos by the stream. The scene stunned investigators. Amanda was still in her work uniform, torn at the chest and arms. Her body bore over 10 stab wounds, 3 of them fatal. Her wrists showed signs of being bound. There was no evidence of sexual assault. She wasn't buried or hidden, but placed openly near a trail, as if someone wanted her to be found. A few steps away, her purse lay spilled, its contents, soggy textbooks, a class schedule, a pharmacy receipt, strewn in the mud. An open textbook page read, "Procedure for treating blunt abdominal trauma." A chillingly strange detail. Detective Marvin Collier, leading the investigation, stated in a brief press conference that this was a calculated murder, not a random act. They zeroed in on 3 suspects: Steve Lennox, a former classmate who showed obsessive behavior toward Amanda; Derek Holman, a drunk diner patron who once argued with her; and Rudy Blanton, a neighbor with a prior record of stalking women. But no evidence was strong enough to charge anyone. At the time, DNA analysis was too rudimentary, and blood samples collected from the scene couldn't be used. In the weeks following Amanda's death, Quincy sank into fear and grief. Residents held a candlelight vigil in the diner's parking lot. A yellow ribbon was tied around the largest oak on Dixie Drive, where Amanda walked to school each morning. The local paper published a photo of the blonde girl with a gentle smile, holding her young son, taken just weeks before the tragedy. Amanda had once told a friend she wanted to become an ER nurse because she didn't want anyone to die from being overlooked. Those words now felt like a bitter prophecy. With no new leads, the case was shelved as cold. The nearly 300-page file was sealed and stored in the Leon County Sheriff's Office archives. Amanda's family fell silent. Noah was sent to live with an aunt in Gainesville. The Bayou Diner operated a few more years before closing. The 1980 Civic was returned to the family, later sold for scrap. And Quincy, like any small town with a great pain, learned to stop saying Amanda's name. But one person never forgot, and one file, 3 pieces of evidence, and a single drop of blood left on a collar, carefully packaged and sealed with fragile hope, held the promise that one day, justice might find its way. That day finally came. But before the light, we must retrace the steps through the darkness. And the first step was that October night in 1983, when Amanda Carter walked out of the familiar diner and never came back. When Amanda's watch stopped at 9:57 p.m., investigators estimated she vanished just 9 to 12 minutes after leaving the Bayou Diner. The route from the diner's parking lot to Gilbert's Pharmacy was only about 1.4 miles, a familiar, well-lit path lined with homes. But that night, the sky was overcast, and 2 streetlights along the main road had been out since earlier that week, unrepaired. Amanda disappeared in a brief window when everything seemed to go silent. When Sheriff Martin Coates first approached the scene, on the morning of October 22nd, he had 23 years on the job, but had never seen a case like this. No late-night distress calls, no screams, no one saw her enter the pharmacy. Deputy Glenn Rollins, his loyal subordinate with just 14 months in the field, worked alongside him. They operated almost manually, snapping photos with a 35mm film camera, measuring tire tracks with a tape measure, handwriting every note. Tiny bloodstains on Amanda's collar were collected with cotton swabs, placed in Ziploc nylon bags, labeled with date, time, and signature, no barcodes, no encryption, no centralized database like today. About a mile from where Amanda's body was found, her Civic was discovered on a dirt path called Kane's Logging Road. Once a route for lumber trucks but long abandoned, the car was pulled off into the grass. The driver's door ajar, keys missing from the ignition. A prescription slip was wedged between the seats, alongside a coffee receipt from the diner, time-stamped 7:13 p.m. that evening. Inside, signs of a struggle. The front seat was reclined fully. A broken hair clip lay on the floor. The case shook all of Leon County. Local papers ran non-stop coverage, plastering Amanda's photo on gas stations, utility poles, and shop windows. To the community, this wasn't just a murder, it was a warning. If a girl like Amanda could be harmed, no one was safe. The pressure on the local police was immense. But they soon realized they were navigating a maze without a map. No witnesses, no traffic cameras, no advanced forensic tools. All they had were professional instincts, a few vague pieces of evidence, and 3 names. Derek Holman, Amanda's ex-boyfriend, had a history of domestic violence from their time in Gainesville. A bald, loud-voiced warehouse worker, he often argued with Amanda in front of neighbors. After their breakup, Amanda moved with her son to live with her mother in Quincy. Derek once showed up in August, banging on her door at midnight, demanding to see his son until police intervened. But on the night Amanda vanished, he had an alibi, working a night shift at a warehouse in Ocala, with a signed delivery log at 10:15 p.m. Javier Montoya, a regular at the Bayou Diner, was known for crude remarks to waitresses. Amanda once told a friend, "He stared like he wanted to tear your skin off." 3 days before her disappearance, Javier left his phone number on a receipt with the note, "You should let me take you home sometime." But Javier was a city electrician, and records showed he was fixing a power outage in East Tallahassee that night, with a coworker confirming his presence until nearly midnight. Steve Lennox, a classmate from Amanda's CNA program at Florida AANDM, was the last on the list. He once left a handwritten note on her car, saying he felt they were meant to understand each other. Amanda ignored it. Lennox had no criminal record, but classmates called his fixation on her oddly intense. He claimed he was home watching TV with his mother that night, but no one else could corroborate. No evidence tied him to the crime, though Coates noted in his report, "Something's off about him. But I can't prove it." The autopsy report pinpointed the time of death between 10 o'clock and 10:20 p.m. on October 20th, aligning with a possible abduction minutes after leaving the diner. The wounds suggested a controlled, deliberate killer who left minimal traces. Blood under Amanda's fingernails was collected, but couldn't be analyzed at the time. Blood on her collar was stored under temporary conditions. After a month with no progress, Coates held a press conference announcing the case's suspension. Amanda's family was devastated but powerless. Louisa Carter, her grieving mother, told the press, "I won't die until I know who killed my daughter." But as years passed and Amanda Carter's name faded to a faint reminder on the nursing school's memorial wall, the case became a sealed wound. 9 minutes, that's all it took for someone to vanish from this world and for a town to be choked by doubt and fear. But those same 9 minutes, handwritten on an old report, would guide justice 42 years later. Only in 1983, no one suspected the real killer was standing just outside the crime scene, holding a flashlight for the police and smiling. After Amanda Carter's case was shelved, the press quieted. Residents stopped whispering her name each festival season, and the investigation file was tucked into a sealed drawer in the Leon County Sheriff's basement archive. Only one person lived with it every day. Noah Carter, Amanda's only son, 4 years old the night his mother left the Bayou Diner and never returned. Noah grew up in a thick, dusty silence, like the air in that archive room. His grandmother Louisa, his only remaining caretaker, never spoke of Amanda's death in clear terms. "Your mom's in a better place," she'd say when he pressed. But her eyes, each time she held Amanda's photo, carried something unyielded, a smoldering anger, an unanswered question. In the small kitchen of their rented home near Magnolia Drive, where Noah spent most of his childhood, his mother's photo sat at the center of a shrine, beside a wooden cross and a candle that never went out at night. Noah learned silence earlier than other kids. He avoided mentioning his mother at school, unsure what to say. Adult whispers, "Someone from the diner must have followed her. Heard it was an old classmate. Police know who did it, but won't arrest," washed over him like cold water, leaving no outward mark, but freezing something deep inside. When Noah was 11, Louisa fell ill. She had a stroke in the bathroom, and a second one took her 8 months later. With no relatives able to take him in, Noah entered Florida's foster system. His first night in a Gainesville shelter, he pulled a blanket over his head and clutched a small photo of his mother, cut from an old newspaper Louisa had laminated, like clinging to the last tangible piece of memory. But strangely, Noah didn't become a troubled kid, spiraling in anger as many feared. He was quiet, patient, hard-working. Perhaps because, in the mere 4 years he had with his mother, he learned that people like them couldn't afford to give up. Noah excelled in school, didn't mind chores, and never complained when moved from one foster home to another. The only thing he kept for himself was his mother's old notebook, filled with her class schedules, work hours, and prescriptions. Each page bore her slanted handwriting, sometimes with notes to herself. 2 weeks until semester exams. Noah's coughing today. Buy syrup. Don't give up. When he entered college, Noah chose nursing. No one pushed or encouraged him. He just knew it's what his mother would have done. And if she never got to wear the nurse's scrubs she dreamed of, he'd do it for her. At Tallahassee Community College, Noah became a respected student, quiet, diligent, always the first to arrive and last to leave the practice room. Teachers called him Carter, and only a few knew that name tied to an unsolved murder. In his second year, during an ER internship, Noah was assigned to a female patient stabbed in a home robbery. As he inserted an IV, his hand shook for the first time in months. Blood. A knife. The woman lay still, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. That night, Noah went home and pulled out the old box of clippings he'd quietly collected for over a decade. Faded headlines, blurry crime scene photos, his mother's last picture, and Sheriff Martin Coates' scrawled note, "Cannot rule out the killer living near the scene." Noah knew what that meant. He'd lived his whole life in the shadow of a name no one dared speak aloud. Quincy never truly forgot Amanda, but they'd learned to drape a polite veil over her memory, pretending it no longer stung, no longer affected anyone. They still drove past Blackwater Creek daily. They ate lunch at the new cafe built on the old Bayou Diner's lot. They waved to the old mechanic Walter Granger every weekend. The man who still lived in that same town, through every festival, every vigil, and all the years, no one looked back. Only Noah refused to accept it, not out of hatred, but because he needed an answer. Not for his mother, for himself. In April 2024, Tallahassee saw 3 weeks of relentless rain, and the Leon County Sheriff's Office basement began to dampen. Industrial fans roared day and night in the archive, jokingly called the cold case graveyard. Rusted metal shelves, musty wooden drawers, time-worn files, all sat as silent relics of stories no one wanted to retell, or no one was left to tell. Detective Marissa Hail, newly transferred from Broward County, had cracked 2 cold cases there using next-generation DNA analysis. At 36, she was reserved, always tying her hair back neatly and carrying the same notebook to every meeting. In her first week, she walked the rows of old files like a coroner probing a body, eyes scanning case codes, fingers flipping brittle yellowed pages. At the 6th shelf, drawer LNC 803019, Hale paused. A thick file, its spine taped with silver duct tape, bore a faded blue ink label, Quarter, Amanda Lynn. She pulled the file to a table. Inside was a rudimentary investigation report, a hand-drawn crime scene sketch, black and white photos developed from film, and a list of 3 questioned suspects. But what made Hail frown was the evidence log. Item 1, navy blue uniform. Item 2, 18 centimeters, blonde hair. Item 3, unidentified blood sample. According to Sheriff Martin Coates' final note, these were sealed in Tin Box 14, stored in the ground floor cold storage. 3 days later, on a Monday morning, as the storage room's temperature was briefly raised for humidity checks, Hail donned a thick coat and rubber gloves and stepped in. Under harsh fluorescent light, she located the aged tin box, labeled in handwriting, Quarter case, sealed 1984. Do not open without special order. She set it on a table, took a deep breath, peeled back cracked tape, and lifted the lid. Inside, Amanda's uniform was wrapped in thick plastic, sealed with wire, and a tag bearing Coates' signature. Hail carefully opened the bag, examined the seams, and spotted a small blood stain on the collar, dark brown, dried stiff. It was the unidentified blood listed in the file. Beneath a layer of tissue paper was a small bag of blonde hair, labeled hair from scene, not matching victim. Nearby was a broken fingernail, caked with dirt, preserved by the instinct of a rookie officer named Rollins, who records later showed left the force in 1986 due to mental health issues. Hail didn't hesitate. Using a modern DNA collection kit, she sampled the collar blood and unidentified hair. 3 days later, she sent them to Parabon Nano Labs, a leading genetic genealogy lab in Virginia, specializing in unsolved cases. She marked the email as high priority, attached the full case file, and added a personal note, possible suspect DNA, only remaining sample. While awaiting results, Hail didn't sit idle. She pored over October 1983, local newspapers, reading every article about Amanda's case, her funeral, the community's spreading fear. She listed everyone who interacted with the victim, noting personal connections, work schedules, even church attendance from community records. One name, Walter Granger, appeared briefly in a route check as a resident near the Bayou Diner. No one had considered him a suspect, a mechanic with no criminal record, no clear link to the victim. But Hail found it odd. Why was he the one who reported hearing dogs barking around 10 p.m.? That night, the only detail that led police to Blackwater Creek's trail. She noted the name but held back. Experience taught her that leads could be false lures, and hunches were never enough. She needed data, she needed confirmation, she needed the DNA. 3 weeks later, an email from Parabon landed in Hail's official inbox with a succinct subject line, Carter 1983 DNA sample, male suspect genealogy identified. Hail opened it, read each line, and gripped her hand so tightly, her knuckles turned white. The final name on the family tree was far from unfamiliar. It was Walter Granger, and for Hail, from that moment, the case was no longer just an old file. It was a living fracture, demanding to be fully exposed, this time, to the end. Walter Granger's name wasn't the first to appear in Parabon's report. The DNA sample Hail sent extracted from Amanda's collar, and the hair found under the ferns at Blackwater Creek, had been analyzed using SNP techniques and compared against over 1.5 million public profiles from commercial genealogy platforms like 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, and GED Match. Initial results yielded distant names: an elderly woman in Texas, a student in Utah, a Granger man in Georgia Hail had never heard of. None were suspects, but they shared one thing: 3% to 5% DNA overlap with the unidentified sample, roughly the level of third cousins. Hail knew what that meant. With enough patience and precision, she could reverse engineer the suspect's entire family tree, from distant relatives, back to great-grandparents, then forward, branch by branch. She began by creating a chart on Watto, a genealogy tool for analyzing relationships from genetic data. From the 3 known distant relatives, she traced back to a couple in Thomas County, Georgia, married in 1889, with 7 children. This pair was the great-grandparents of many current Grangers, Barnetts, Caldwells, and Hayneses. After 2 weeks, the family tree held over 180 names across 5 generations. Hail vetted each occupation, residence, criminal history, habits, and crucially, their location in 1983. She eliminated women, those too young, or deceased before that year. The list narrowed to 67 people. Of those, 44 were men who had lived in or passed through Florida during the time of the crime. She cross-referenced with census data, school records, military files, Social Security records, even driving reports. Each week, the list shrank, name by name. One was a sailor stationed in Guam in 1983, eliminated. Another was paralyzed in a 1980 car accident, eliminated. Another, a priest in Rome all of October that year, eliminated. After nearly 3 months of relentless work, the list was down to 30 men who could have accessed the victim at the time of the crime. Hail pinned their photos to a whiteboard in her office, connecting them with red string to bloodlines and addresses. She called it the Blood Family Tree, a biological map of silence and evasion. And then, near the end of the list, she found Walter E. Granger again. Born 1957 in Apalachicola, Florida. Lived in Quincy since 1980. A part-time mechanic when he arrived, later opening a small repair shop, Granger's Auto, in 1984, 1 year after Amanda's murder. No criminal record, no mental health history, nothing to raise suspicion for over 40 years. But in an old job application, Hail spotted a detail no one had noticed in 1983. Walter had worked electrical maintenance at the Bayou Diner for 2 weeks, exactly when Amanda was employed there. Hail reopened the entire case file, combing through initial statements. Walter Granger wasn't among the questioned suspects, but he appeared once in a report by Officer Glenn Rollins. Resident Walter G. reported hearing dogs barking loudly around 10:10 p.m. toward Blackwater Creek. A brief, seemingly harmless note, but to Hail, it was the final nail. Because if he heard dogs barking toward the creek, his house was very close to the crime scene, and if he was truly there that night, why had no one thought to check him? Hail tracked Granger's residences over the years. His home was just under 1.2 miles from the Bayou Diner. The route Amanda took each night, Dixie Drive, ran right past his neighborhood, she asked herself. Could he have watched her, or was he the one who ambushed her that fateful night? It still wasn't enough. Hail needed certainty. She contacted Parabon again, requesting a direct comparison of Granger's DNA to the original sample, now digitized and analyzed down to individual alleles. 2 weeks later, the results came back. Match probability 99.9987%. The DNA from Amanda's collar belonged to Walter Granger, no question. Outside, summer was nearing. But in Hail's small office, staring at the whiteboard crisscrossed with red string, the temperature seemed to drop. She gazed at Granger's name atop the family tree, no longer a suspect but a killer confirmed by science. He had survived dozens of investigations, hundreds of articles, thousands of rumors. He had lived among them, among those who lit candles for Amanda, among those who slowly forgot the case, yet never left the town. And now, through his own bloodline, he had revealed the name that for 42 years lingered silently on the edge of fate. After receiving the near-perfect DNA match, Detective Marissa Hail didn't act immediately. Instead, she spent the next 4 weeks doing what investigators call walking through a killer's routine, observing without interference, silently watching. Walter Granger, 67, still lived in a single-story ranch house at the end of Live Oak Drive, just 4 blocks from the old Bayou Diner site. His front yard bloomed with neatly trimmed hydrangeas. Every Monday and Thursday morning, he drove his Toyota sedan out at 7:15 a.m. to Granger's Auto, the shop he'd run since 1984 until semi-retiring. At noon, he returned home to eat with his wife, Diane Granger, then watered plants, napped, and walked the dog at 4 p.m. On weekends, he attended Baptist church, sat in the third pew, wore a pale blue shirt, and stood to sing hymns on cue. No one ever thought he could do wrong. Hail watched from a distance, noting every detail in her notebook. The man whose DNA was on a murdered girl's collar in 1983 was now teaching his granddaughter to ride a bike, smiling at neighbors, and accepting invites to 4th of July barbecues. The more she observed, the more Hail shuddered, not because he was a shadowy figure or a fugitive, but because he had survived by crafting a facade of kindness for 42 years. While awaiting a search warrant from her superiors, Hail sought out those who knew Granger in his youth. A city record showed he worked temporary maintenance at the Bayou Diner in September and October 1983, exactly when Amanda Carter was there. Walter was 26, unmarried, and had lived in Quincy for nearly 3 years. Another record showed he registered a 1981 Ford F-150 pickup, moss green, a common model, but not overly prevalent in the area then. Hail approached Diane Granger, his current wife, posing as an inspector reviewing old residency records. Diane, 73, silver-haired and bespectacled, beamed with pride about her husband. Walter's a good man, worked his whole life, no partying, no drinking, never been to court for anything, she said. But when Hail gently asked about fall 1983, when they'd only been dating a few months, Diane's eyes flickered. Well, it's been a while, but funny thing, I remember that week, Walter came home late one night, said his truck broke down, had to push it back, she mused. Scratched his hands, had a mark on his cheek too, but the next day, he asked me to go to St. George Beach. Out of nowhere, we'd just started dating, and he even borrowed his cousin's car for it. Hail noted it with 2 red underlines. Left town right after Amanda's disappearance. Had injuries, no alibi. This was no coincidence. She returned to the station and requested a second review of the autopsy report. The scratch on Amanda's collar was under her left jaw, 2 centimeters from the seam. Dried blood was on the fabric. It wasn't clear if it was hers or the killer's. When Hail rechecked the blood sample, the software reported, sample may contain mixed DNA from 2 sources, victim and unidentified male, matched to Walter Granger. The question now wasn't who did it, but why was he never suspected? The answer chilled Hail, because he was too ordinary, too trustworthy, and because the 1983 investigative system wasn't built to suspect men like Walter, white, steadily employed, no criminal record, polite, and socially adept. All attention went to the volatile ex-boyfriend, the crude diner patron, or the obsessive classmate. Meanwhile, the real killer lived 4 blocks from the victim, owned a truck that could easily drag Amanda to the woods, and vanished into the night without a second glance. Hail reviewed her 500-page case file, built from scratch. At its center was Amanda Lynn Carter, in bold. Surrounding it were dozens of yellow sticky notes marking timelines, locations, evidence, and beside it, in red ink, Walter Granger lived among them. No one saw, no one asked, but now she had seen, and she would ask the questions. 3 days after securing a search warrant, Detective Marissa Hail and a forensic team searched Walter Granger's home on a dreary Wednesday morning. Light rain wet the shingles on Live Oak Drive, while Diane, her horrified expression unmasked, stood by the window, hands trembling, clutching her shirt. Walter, not yet formally arrested, was invited to the station to assist with verifying DNA from an old case. He went, without protest or panic. But in his eyes, Hail caught something fleeting, like a man sensing a door closing behind him. The first focus was the garage behind the house, where Walter once worked privately before opening his shop. The spacious cement-floored garage smelled of oil and mildew, cluttered but orderly. On a wall-mounted rack, a collection of hunting knives, folding knives, and forest razors sat neatly in a glass case. Each was meticulously cleaned, some still in leather sheaths. Some had wooden handles, others horn, one even engraved with WG on the hilt. Hail ordered them all seized. After hours of searching, the forensic team found a 9-inch black-handled hunting knife, its shape and size nearly identical to the fatal wounds recorded in the 1983 autopsy. Though no biological traces remained on the blade, time and environment had erased any DNA. The forensic expert confirmed the blade's edge and serration matched the deep cuts on Amanda's chest and abdomen. But the most critical evidence wasn't on the rack. It was in a brown paper box, tucked behind a crate of repair receipts, at the bottom of an old filing cabinet. At first, it was just an unmarked, weathered box. But when Hail opened it, she froze. Inside was a stack of neatly folded newspapers, tied with frayed cloth. The top one was the October 23, 1983, Florida Times, headlined, "Body of Student Amanda Carter, Found in Blackwater Creek." The rest were local papers, clipped from small columns, investigation articles spanning a decade after the crime. Some had red circles around investigation details, potential suspect names, and minutiae like victim wore a Navy diner uniform. At the bottom, the team found a blurry black and white photocopied, of Amanda wiping a table at the Bayou Diner. It had never appeared in mainstream media. Hail suspected Walter had taken it himself, or obtained it from an unpublicized source. Somehow, he'd kept it for over 4 decades. The box was sealed and logged, as evidence not part of official archives, suspected linked to post-crime obsession. In investigative circles, they call it memory ashes, objects killers hide as a ritual, to retain power, or simply to remember. For Walter, it wasn't just a collection, it was a silent shrine, built in the darkness of a garage no one entered for years. When news of the search leaked to the press, as is common with cold cases cracked by technology, Tallahassee reeled. Notices at the Baptist church were quietly removed. A neighbor who received Walter's Thanksgiving turkey spoke on local TV, tears in her eyes. "I let my daughter play at his house. I trusted him like my own father." A former student Walter taught to fix cars for free, as a teen said, "I remember him making me wash my hands before touching an engine, always asking, if she were your daughter, would you let her drive this car?" Amid the uproar, the church where Walter attended announced it would temporarily suspend Mr. Granger's participation until legal clarity is reached. Locals organized a new candlelight vigil for Amanda Carter, the first in 30 years. On social media, #Amanda Deserved Justice trended, paired with the photo of her gentle smile, the one Noah Carter kept in his wallet through his youth. While the media spun the investigation into a modern science miracle, Marissa Hail remained silent. For her, this wasn't a victory. It was a ritual of restoring a name to pain. Each piece of evidence wasn't an endpoint, but a whisper from the past, saying justice never truly dies. It only waits for someone patient enough to listen, through layers of dust, unopened drawers, and the ashes of memories that never fade. The interrogation room at the Leon County Sheriff's Office was unremarkable. An old wooden table, 2 metal chairs, a wall-mounted camera, and 4 pale gray walls last painted nearly a decade ago. But for Detective Marissa Hail, it was where truth often emerged, not in shouts, but in lingering silences. Walter Granger was brought in at 10 a.m. on August 12, 2024. He wore a pale blue shirt, khakis, hands uncuffed, at Hail's request. He sat as if invited for coffee at a familiar diner, hands lightly clasped, eyes calm, and asked a chilling opening question. "I'm guessing this is about that girl?" The interrogation lasted 6 hours, split into 3 sessions. For the first 2 hours, Walter's voice stayed even. He spoke as if describing a faulty transmission, steady and measured. When Hail asked if he knew Amanda Carter, he nodded. "She worked at the diner. I fixed some wiring behind the kitchen. It was a long time ago." Hail didn't rush. She laid out crime scene photos, old newspaper clippings, his own prior statements, arranged neatly on the table like a logic puzzle awaiting a solution. Walter looked, unflinching. He denied all accusations, citing poor memory, then pivoted to saying, "I cooperated from the start, even reported the dogs barking that night." When Hale mentioned the box of newspapers found in his garage, he shrugged. "I kept them because it was haunting. I lived nearby, you understand." By early afternoon, Hale shifted tactics. She pulled out an enlarged photo of Amanda's body, taken from above, with diagrams of wounds and blood around the collar. She said nothing, just slid the image toward him. Walter stared at it. For 20 seconds, he didn't move. Then his right hand trembled slightly, just enough for Hale to notice, like an old door creaking open in a breeze. She spoke softly but firmly. "We have your DNA. On her collar, on the hair, on the blood sample. That doesn't belong to the victim. And this is the knife." She placed the black-handled hunting knife on the table. "I know you remember it, because you kept it, like a part of the memory you never wanted to lose." Walter said nothing. He stared at the photo for a moment longer, then let out a long breath, as if he'd held it in his lungs for 42 years. His eyes no longer shone as they had when he entered the room. They dulled, not with remorse, but with surrender. "I didn't mean to kill her at first," he began, his voice lower, slower. "I just wanted to teach her a lesson, because she humiliated me. In front of others." Hale didn't interrupt. "I liked her. Who wouldn't? She was beautiful, gentle, but there was something cold about her. I tried talking to her several times while fixing the wiring at the diner, but she always brushed me off. Then one day, I said I could drive her home after her shift. She laughed. Not a kind laugh, the kind that made me feel like a joke. She even said loudly, 'I'd rather walk in the rain.' The other waitresses heard and laughed along." His voice caught, not from emotion, but from a twisted, decades-old wound. "That night, I waited at the end of the street. I knew she'd stop by the pharmacy. I just wanted to talk, but when she saw me, she panicked. I grabbed her arm, she scratched me, screamed. I slapped her, and after that, I lost control." Walter recounted pulling Amanda into his truck, tying her hands with rubber cord, and driving to Blackwater Creek. She struggled, cried, and he, in a mix of rage and fear of being caught, used the hunting knife to end it. He spoke as if describing how to cut a car's brake line. No tears, no trembling, just cold, bare truth. After killing Amanda, Walter drove home, washed his hands with motor oil, changed clothes, and tossed the knife into his toolbox. The next morning, he bought tickets to take Diane, the woman he was courting, on a beach trip for a few days. "I needed to get out of there, needed proof I was somewhere else." And she was thrilled. Hale said nothing more. She turned off the recorder, stood, and signaled the accompanying officer to enter. When the number 8 cuffs locked around Walter's wrists, he didn't resist. He only said one final thing before being let out. "I thought I'd buried it deep enough," but Hale knew no truth could be buried forever, especially not one etched on a young woman's body, left cold in the woods for 42 years, and now speaking out. On March 12, 2025, the Leon County Courthouse opened the official trial for Amanda Lynn Carter's case, 42 years after it was filed as a cold case. The courtroom was packed, not just with reporters, prosecutors, forensic staff, or the victim's family, but also with elderly residents, now gray-haired, who had watched Amanda's name fade into a shadow in the town's history. In the public seating, Noah Carter, Amanda's only son, wore a navy blue nurse's uniform, sitting between 2 colleagues from the Jacksonville hospital, where he served as head nurse. Walter Granger, now 68, was led in wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, hands cuffed at his waist. He didn't bow his head or look at anyone in the room, his eyes empty, as if his soul had been drained. His court-appointed lawyer announced the defendant pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, accepting a plea deal for life without parole to avoid the death penalty under Florida law. Judge Evelyn McAllister read a 12-page indictment. Line by line, Amanda's death was recounted in legal terms: deliberate act, use of lethal force, concealment of identity, to evade criminal responsibility for over 4 decades. As the words echoed, an older woman, a former classmate of Amanda's, sobbed and was escorted out. When it came to the victim's family statement, the judge invited Noah to the stand. The courtroom fell silent. Noah set down a folded paper, took a deep breath, and looked directly at the man who killed his mother. "I don't clearly remember my mother's face. I was only 4 when she died. I just remember the smell of her jacket, always mint and antiseptic. She wanted to be a nurse. She wrote in her diary, 'I want to save people, not bury my dreams,' but that dream died because of a man sitting here who killed her and lived as if innocent for 42 years. Every Christmas I looked out the window wondering if Mom were alive, would we bake together? Every time I put on my nurse's uniform, I think of the dream she never got to live. I'm not here today for justice because justice can't bring back a mother. I'm here to say, no matter how long you tried to hide the truth, it survived. My mother's dream died, but the truth is still alive." The courtroom held its breath. As Noah stepped down, he didn't glance at Walter again. He only clutched the paper in his hand like a talisman, the last belief that even the darkest things couldn't kill the truth. Next, Diane Granger, Walter's wife of over 40 years, was absent from the trial, but her lawyer's office sent the judge an official divorce filing, signed the morning after the guilty plea. In an attached handwritten letter, she wrote one sentence, "I lived with a man I never truly knew, and I cannot forgive that." The sentence was delivered at 3:42 p.m. Walter Granger received life without parole, no appeal, no transfer out of Florida. As the verdict rang out, he showed no reaction. He only closed his eyes, as if accepting a punishment 40 years overdue. After the trial, Tallahassee residents gathered at a small plaza near the courthouse, where a temporary plaque bore Amanda Carter's name, inscribed below, "Forgotten by time, but not by truth." People brought flowers, candles, and handwritten notes from nursing students at Florida A&M, students who studied in her dream. When reporters asked Hail how she felt post-trial, she said simply, "I don't feel relieved. I just feel someone finally listened to her." That evening, Noah returned to the hospital. He began his night shift as usual, adjusting the name tag on his chest, Noah L. Carter, RN, Chief Nursing Officer. An elderly patient, admitted for a heart attack, looked at him and asked, "You're the one on TV today, aren't you?" Noah nodded. The woman took his hand, smiling weakly. "Your mom would be so proud." He said nothing, but deep in his heart, a door softly closed, making way for the first light in 42 years. When Walter Granger was sentenced, Tallahassee's familiar streets suddenly felt foreign. No one accused each other. No one screamed in rage, but no one could look at the old neighborhood with the same eyes. It was as if, for 42 years, the community had lived with an unnamed wound, until it festered and was torn open before the public. 3 days after the trial, the Bayou Diner, where Amanda Carter worked and was last seen alive, was fully demolished. The land's new owner, a Cuban investor, announced plans for a community center for Florida A&M students. On the temporary wooden fence around the site, someone painted in white, "We never forgot you, Amanda." Granger's Auto, Walter's repair shop for decades, was also permanently closed. Its wooden sign was removed one Sunday morning, in silence. Former co-workers quit or moved to other shops. Some old customers felt chills recalling times they let their kids wait in the garage while Walter fixed brakes or adjusted spark plugs. Yet, the exposed truth also brought a strange relief, as if the town was shedding a curse held too long. Eliza Sherman, a high school teacher who lived on Amanda Street in 1983, told local press, "It feels like a door locked in our minds for decades suddenly swung open. We tried to forget, pretended not to see. But now, no one has to imagine anymore. The killer has a name, a face, and he's no longer a shadow." At a memorial for Amanda Carter, on what would have been her 64th birthday, over 200 people attended. Noah Carter stood in the front row, holding white flowers, eyes closed as the church bell tolled 42 times, each for a year the truth was buried. Amanda's only surviving photo, enlarged on the memorial stand, carried the gentle smile forgotten under time's dust. As for Detective Marissa Hail, post-sentencing, she was honored by the Florida Sheriff's Association for exceptional contributions to cold case investigation through genetic genealogy. The press dubbed her the DNA detective, and law schools and criminal justice academies invited her to speak. But when asked how she felt, Hale only shook her head. "I didn't solve this for recognition. I just thought it was time to give a name back to a woman the town forgot." She didn't go on national TV, didn't write a book, didn't grant exclusive interviews. After it all, Hale returned to her usual work, sitting in her small office with cold case boards lining the walls. Only now, when she looked at them, she knew those names, faded, old, fallen from the community's memory, could still speak. If someone was patient enough to listen. From Amanda Carter's case, Leon County established a new unit called the Cold Case DNA Initiative, dedicated to reviewing pre-2000 unsolved cases, especially those with untested biological evidence. Nursing and forensic students at Florida State University began interning there. Inspired by the quest for truth for a woman once called a forgotten victim. One March afternoon, after a long shift, Noah Carter returned to his small Jacksonville apartment and turned on the living room TV. The late-night news mentioned a planned Florida memorial park for cold case victims, where Amanda Carter's name would be among the first engraved on a bronze plaque. He quietly turned off the screen, stepped onto the balcony, and looked up at the night sky. For the first time in his life, when he thought of the old town, the narrow streets, the creek where his mother was left, the oil-scented garage, the diner long gone, Noah felt no fear or anger. He saw a town learning to breathe again, learning to revive from the ashes of burned memories. That town had once chosen silence, but this time, it chose to speak. And from that truth, new life began. 7 days after the sentencing, Detective Marissa Hail returned to the Leon County Sheriff's Office cold case room, where it all began. The fluorescent lights were as pale as her first visit, the rusted shelves still stacked with dusty files. But today, one file would leave this place forever. She placed her hand on the cover of case LNC 80-3019. Amanda Lynn Carter, yellowed edges worn, spine taped with silver, handwritten ink faded. The file weighed nearly 3 kilos, over 700 pages thick. It held everything: crime scene photos, autopsy reports, statements, DNA samples, a sprawling family tree like eucalyptus roots. And finally, Walter Granger's handwritten confession. Hale pulled out her familiar black pilot pen, flipped to the last page, and wrote in steady script, "Status closed. Perpetrator, Walter Granger. Guilty plea. Case closed. March 19, 2025. 42 years after Amanda Lynn Carter's death. She set the pen down, sat still for a long time, then closed the file, placed it in a sealed box, and labeled it for the Florida State Justice Archives. That box would rest in cold storage, where future generations could read, learn, or simply remember. It wasn't just evidence of a case, it was a testament that justice could sleep, but never die. That same day, at a small cemetery south of Jacksonville, Noah Carter visited his mother's grave for the first time since the trial's end. Not because he'd forgotten it, but because, for 42 years, he hadn't dared face it fully. The simple headstone read, Amanda Lynn Carter, 1961-1983, Mother Dreamer. Forgotten. Before the grave, Noah brought no flowers, only an envelope inside, the original certificate from the Florida Board of Nursing, his name at the top, Noah L. Carter, RN, Chief Nursing Officer. He sat, placed the paper on the grave, touched the cool stone, and whispered, "You wrote you'd be the first in our family to wear a nurse's uniform. I couldn't help you do that, but I did it for you. And today, for the first time, I feel we've finished the journey." No reply came, Only the breeze through old oaks, leaves rustling like a distant, familiar whisper. A week later, on Dixie Drive, the road Amanda walked her final night. The city placed a small bronze sign at the intersection where she vanished. It read, "In memory of Amanda Lynn Carter, 1961-1983. She passed through here and never returned." But the truth caught up. Locals began calling that stretch Amanda's Mile, a tribute to a forgotten victim and a reminder that light could come, even 4 decades late. As for Hail, after finalizing the file and handing off duties, she took a 2-week leave. In her email to her supervisor, she wrote one line, "Some cases aren't solved, they're heard. I think I've heard enough for a while." She drove north through Florida, avoiding cities, taking quiet roads she'd never traveled. At night, she stopped at a small seaside motel, opened the window to let the breeze in, and for the first time in months, slept a dreamless sleep. The shadow that once cloaked Amanda's life, Noah's childhood, and Tallahassee's community was gone from Dixie Drive, no longer lurking in the shade or waiting under streetlights. It had a name, a form, and had been brought to light, and though nothing could reclaim 42 lost years, the truth found its way. Not because it was strong, but because some were brave enough not to forget. The story of Amanda Carter's case is not just a 42-year investigation, it's a haunting reminder that truth cannot be buried forever, and justice, though late, can still heal the painful voids in modern American communities. In today's U.S., where cold cases number over 250,000 unsolved, this story is a powerful testament to the role of science, perseverance, and humanity in criminal investigation. Detective Marissa Hail, with tireless dedication, represents a new breed of investigators who trust genetic technology, but also the value of listening and empathy. Her unearthing of Walter Granger's name came not just from DNA, but from keen intuition in cross-referencing tiny details, an old barking dog's statement, the distance from house to diner, an unquestioned scratch on a face. It shows every detail matters if we dare to look with fresh eyes. For Americans, where justice is a moral cornerstone, this story reminds us that outward normalcy shouldn't shield from scrutiny. Walter was the kind neighbor, regular churchgoer, helpful mechanic, but also the killer. The greatest lesson: we must not let social biases obscure truth. Justice demands vigilance, impartiality, and resolve, not just from the legal system, but from the entire community. If you believe truth deserves to be heard, even after 42 years buried, subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring more unanswered cases. Thank you for joining, and see you in the next story of justice, memory, and unwavering faith.